So, welcome to the House of Happiness, Dr. Arjun. And before we jump into the conversation on relationships, could you tell us a little bit about you? Because the nation wants to know who is Dr. Who is the
Maybe,
Dr. A?
I miss Arnab for sure. But I'm not for the nation or the republic. I think I'm for the House of Happiness and for smaller segments. So I'm Dr. Arjun. I did medicine. Then I got into psychology. I studied NLP. I traveled across India, doing lots of courses on traditional medicine and uh, understanding of Ayurveda, especially the aspect of mind in Ayurveda, and
Mhm.
how does this play very important role in our modern scenario. So I practice a form of medicine which is holistic and integrated. I approach more on the lines of nutrition and the dietary approach in the mental health, how the gut bacteria and the things that are digested in us is actually responsible for health. So, and apart from that, I also work with counseling because all these are just modules. How I look, I consider myself a mind body coach, and that's who I am. So, yes, that's it. That's it.
That's awesome. And you speak 9 languages?
Yes, I can speak pretty much 9 languages. I can almost every South Indian language and Hindi and of course Sanskrit. So that's probably because of the geographic benefit that I have received, um, being born in a particular part in Karnataka, which the dialect there is Tulu, and then my parents are from Coorg. So by the time I was 3 years, I could actually speak my mother tongue, the Kannada and Tulu, which is like the local language. And then we end up going to school and we learn English. So a 5-year-old kid having to juggle between 4 languages, it's not difficult, it's not hard, but it's just that a geographical advantage. So
Right.
I would not consider that as any child who is from that part from our community could do that. So I don't think it's like somebody from Gujarat living in Mumbai and picks up Marathi, Hindi,
Yeah.
English, and like by the time the child is like 5 years, he has at
It's
least 4 5 languages.
natural.
It's
Right.
natural, yeah. But then subsequently, since I traveled, I stayed in different states, I could pick up languages. So I'm not saying it's I don't think it as an achievement that I sought. It was just a consequential, you need food and you need good friends to talk to when you're in a new land and when you're in a new
Yeah, yeah,
state.
yeah. The ever
The language.
humble Dr. A, huh?
I don't think this is humility, but
No, I was being sarcastic. Don't worry.
thank you.
Okay. So, so today's conversation with what we wanted to take out to the people out there, and a lot of people have asked questions about relationships. So, and one of the first things that always that I wonder when I talk to people is, why do we need relationships? Of course, they say man is a social being, and one of the keys to happiness is deep and nurturing relationships. But if you could just share as to why we need them so much, coming from a space of need, that's a very, very prominent thing that we see in relationships.
Wow. If just to understand this question, you must understand the basic evolution of mankind. So, what I mean by this is man is one of the very few mammals who cannot walk or stand up immediately after birth.
Right.
So, if you look at almost quite a lot of organisms, like it could be cats, probably by the 15th day they're like crawling out, um, and you see these kinds of and elephants and certain cattle, they immediately stand up on birth.
Right.
However, humans, we have a unique trait. Most humans don't stand up till they're 18, 21, 25,
Right.
and some never stand up. So this is more of a psychosocial factor responsible for the ability to stand on their individual feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, thanks to uh, human parenting, uh, growing up is not mandatory in our society anymore.
Ouch. Yeah.
So
Unfortunately, yes.
yeah, so we have to understand that as one of the basic foundational principles. It has been what makes humans different from the deviant apes or monkeys is the factor of mother. So this character or this being whom we call even today as mother always chose to feed her weaker child more than the stronger child. This does not happen in any animal in the wide universe. It does not happen. The weaker child is left to die. The weaker child is left to not, they know it's a liability on the procreative system. They know that it's
Right.
impossible for a weaker being to um, implement the law of nature, which is survival of the fittest. And then this deviant ape called humans, they walk in, and there within amongst the humans a creature called mother emerges, and she chooses that the child, however weak he or she is, must survive.
Hmm.
And that changes the social dynamics of the humankind like never before.
Right.
She instills the value of relationship. Now, if that element is removed, like I often see people today, they say relationship is not important, I'm much stronger, like they're trying to go back to the values of the wild. That would just disintegrate the being in its biggest, biggest space. Imagine every person thinks only for himself or herself. The humankind itself starts to become into minute pieces. There is no reason to
Disintegrate,
interact.
right?
Yes,
Hmm.
yes. There is no reason to integrate. There is no reason to. So, the origin of relationship happens in a mother wanting to bond with her child, even the weakest of the child. So we could go into it in
Yeah.
multiple levels, picking up, but definitely it's beyond the scope of this. It's that
Sure. Sure.
itself is like
It's another
understanding
topic.
relationship is a
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
It's
The whole
another
topic by
topic,
itself.
but yes, but this is where relationships begin. And if this is understood, if this is integrated, if this is honored, this is respected, the whole dynamics of relationships start to improve
Right.
across all the systems. Yeah.
Wow. That is a great perspective. And because we're on a timeline here, I'm just going to jump into some of the popular questions that have come up. And
Okay.
what's popular is what causes conflict and hurt in relationships?
Okay. This can be looked in multiple ways.
Mhm.
However, I would like to look at it from two dimensions. The first dimension is the dimension of individuality, and second dimension is dimension of communication, where two individuals are communicating with each other. So I would say this is like the core of the conflict, the individuality and communication challenges. There are other challenges of conflicts which are beyond, like you need to understand what individuals consciousness is in much more depth before we go there. But just taking individual ego, and I would like to address conflict from this perspective.
Sure.
So the moment every being assumes an identity, identity is not complex. Identity is the name, the gender, the religion, the country you're in, the food that you eat, the language that you speak, the state that you're born in, and the god that you pray. All this integrate to construct this organism called human, who has a certain set of identities. Now, this identity is an unique signature for each being. Today, we have a lot of gender crises, gender issues happening globally. However, the gender is the first thing that the being is labeled with the moment the child is born.
Yeah.
Like even before the time of birth and gender of the child is declared by the doctor.
Right.
So now, with that identity being imprinted upon the child, the mind of the child or the which is inside the child can take. Did I lose you there?
Yeah, just for a second. Yeah.
Okay. So the mind of the child, uh, if it chooses to fight against the gender, it ends up going against every identity that has been structured from there on. It's like the core.
Okay.
Hence, if this is targeted, if the gender is targeted, and truly people can be free of biases of gender.
Hmm.
I'm not saying gender doesn't exist. However, I'm saying that the biases that are associated with gender, if that is removed, then numerous challenges of the identities can be addressed.
Okay.
So this is the key. This is like the identity which is in the core of every being. This is layered.
Yeah.
Did I lose you?
Hear you. No, no, no. I can hear you.
Hello?
I can hear
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Okay. 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 So this is the core. After the gender, the child is christened. So what we mean by Christian is the child is given a name
A
by
name. Yeah.
mother and father.
Right. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Is your network? I can
Can you
see
hear
you.
me?
My network is pretty good, but you're fluctuating. I don't know
Okay,
what
but
it is.
I can hear you clearly.
You
Go
can
on.
hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm not really sure if, because it appears to be. It appears. Yeah. Now you're back. Now you're
Yeah.
back.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's actually showing me that your signal is going down, and
Oh,
you're
okay.
probably. Yeah. So yeah. So after the gender identity, the child is Christian. So the child
Right.
is given a name to live with. And
Right.
then the child is taught about the traditional values or lack of it by the parents. And then the child is exposed to media or TV. And eventually, an onion peel effect of identity is structured to the child. And the child grows up to become an individual.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this individual is not a black and white organism. It's all shades in between. So at any point, whatever this child or being learns, it applies not just with its parents from where these values are taught, but also with the surroundings.
Right.
When there is an acceptance of the behavior, this identity is settled in.
Right.
If the behavior is shown to have any repercussions, if any rebellious attitude, the child fights against that attitude. I don't want this.
Right.
Such an attitude emerges. So there is an existing conflict within an individual already. This is not just in the education doesn't count here. The the economic status won't count here. Your family background won't count here. Nothing actually counts. If the conflict is instilled in the being of who we are discussing, if there is conflict in the core, every relationship he tends to see through with the lens of conflict to whatever extent that he or she is engaging in. Because the conflict is in the core.
Wow.
And coming to the second aspect of conflicts in relationship, we come to communication. So for a very, very long time, people have considered communication is what, let's assume between you and me right now, communication is what Dr. A is telling Janaki.
Yeah.
No, it's wrong.
Correct.
Communication is what Janaki is understanding of what Dr. A is saying. So till the time somebody who is conveying the data does not take the burden of understanding the perspective of the listener, the communication is not complete.
Right. Right.
So when any relationship is guided by individuality and communication in its core, the other factors which govern the relationship, like there are numerous other factors which govern the relationship. There is something called as bond, then there is something called as feedback. So there are numerous components which play there. None of them can be addressed unless we address these two core principles.
Right.
So conflict emerges in the core.
So your
And then yes,
person is conflicted from within, that is going to reflect in every relationship that they have, because that's the lens they're looking at it through.
Not necessarily every relationship, because what would happen is if I choose to have like there is something like I mentioned before, there is something called definition of the bond. Say for example, when two people meet, they come up with a term which says this is the term we define our relationship. So it could be friendship, it could be child parent, it could be marriage, it could be acquaintance, it could be platonic.
Sure.
There's like so there are terminologies which each relationship is represented by. And then what I mean by bond is there is a promise that is expected out of each of the bonds. So we unknowingly, unconsciously adhere to the bond in a society.
Right.
So certain bonds, it might not be hard to maintain relationship, because there might not be too much of space interaction. However, if this bond has to have a lot of interpersonal spatial interaction, the numerous challenges are presented. It ends up becoming like I do to an Indian constitution. So, it starts with, the I do. To thick and thin, I stand by that this person. I do. I'll be your friend. I do. We take that promise, and then eventually it builds up to clauses, sub clauses, and
Right.
articles, and like whatnot. So,
Right.
but
The
yeah,
fine print, as they call it.
the fine print, as it is called. Yeah. So yes. So we come
Right.
from there. We need to understand the bond, if we have to understand relationship completely. However, now answering your question, where does conflict come from? Conflict comes from this understanding of the individuality and lack of responsibility of communication by the person who is throwing out the data.
Wow. Right. Yeah, and from personal experience, the little that I've seen, it very often happens that we are not willing to be vulnerable enough in our conversations, which is where we've already assumed a few things, and we're coming from a place of trying to protect ourselves or defense, and which is why the whole tone of the conversation can completely change and take it to another level altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because you brought this word vulnerability, um, there are a few words which are graciously used. One is judgment. Second is vulnerability. Uh, Third is criticism. Okay, now we have to understand what each of the word means when it comes to relationship, because unknowingly, unconsciously, uh, saying that I'm not participating in that, we end up participating in it.
Okay.
Like, it's a mask that we wear to not participate, we participate in it.
By
So,
to participate, we participate in it.
yes, it's like a mirror kind of a relationship. So, saying that you're being vulnerable, so now this is a this is like a technique which, when I used to do a lot of relationship counseling, I used to get this, wife is crying and she needs help. Husband goes to help her, and the wife says, I don't need your help. And then husband steps back, and then the wife is like, you don't come to me, you have just left me alone when I'm in pain. And this is like a game which happens. So eventually, the law that one has to be vulnerable is misunderstood by the husband on this side, as you are trying to pull me into something where, it's going to be another war which is being orchestrated. I would not want to be there. So vulnerability or crying is actually seen as a manipulative tool, by people who have been engaging in relationship for a long time. So we talk of vulnerability, but when it is being applied in relationship, like initially I see a lot of young counselors. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not young. I'm just saying, like, somebody who is
You
new
just
into
said
the
it.
somebody who is new into the field.
It's on record. You can't take it back now.
Somebody who is like really new
Yeah.
into the field.
Yeah.
They go out and say, be vulnerable in the relationship, express, and then they end up doing that, and after 4 years they reach me, and I'm like, okay, so you were vulnerable, and then what happened? And like, you're at the verge of divorce right now.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
there are multiple tools which, people don't understand when they use these words.
Right.
So I'm not saying these are critical words, but these words have different meanings in
That's
different
right.
people's perspective.
That's right.
So
And while we're talking about it, also I realized what I'm talking about vulnerable is different from what you're talking about vulnerable.
yes,
And that's where conflict begins, because I'm
yes,
something else and you're talking about something else.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And the funny part is that happens in relationships because uh, people will say, let's be loyal to each other. Man's definition of loyalty is very different from a woman's definition of loyalty. They both say, of course, we'll be loyal. And they both go out and do their own things. And ta-da! We're in trouble.
You didn't tell me you went to a movie.
Yeah. You went with your friends and you didn't tell me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
words and being on the same page, as you rightly
Yes.
said, is extremely important at least when you're discussing or talking to somebody that you're in a relationship with.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
So,
So that's where communication and individuality. So
right.
we have addressed a few things here. We have addressed a few things today, but I'm sure like our viewers would definitely want more. But unless they understand that we are coming from a foundation which is much deeper than
Yeah.
where they are actually interacting in, like there are definitions for each words that they use, which can
True.
mean different things in them. It doesn't mean what is my definition or what is your
Yeah.
definition or what is Indira Gandhi's definition. Doesn't really matter.
True.
But between husband and wife, what are their definitions? That should be clear.
Very clear. Yeah.
Yes.
Are we taking? So are we getting into how to actually resolve this? Or is it going to be too
We
big?
could see. No. It's actually extremely simple.
Mm-hmm.
So resolving any conflict begins with just one single step: gratitude.
That's simple.
That's it. That's very simple. Be grateful for what the other person is contributing to you, and it has to be mutual. Like
But
that's it.
when you're so mad at each other all the time, and when you're like waiting to bite their heads off, how do you give gratitude from what space do you have to get into to actually be able to give gratitude in such a moment? Because that's a relationship reality these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole journey of so-called marriage is you deciphering this secret for yourself. It's as simple as that.
No. You can't get away by saying that. You're going to have to work harder and just share.
No, I mean, see, this is where okay, this is where we come in with therapists or coaches or counselors. It doesn't matter who is actually guiding the process, but whoever is guiding the relationship in during coaching or during therapy, they have to ensure that both the partners are at least building the attitude of gratitude in every session with respect to each other.
Right.
This is the role of a therapist. So when you're trying to bite off your spouse's whatever head or neck or I mean and if you want to just kill him, like it's a or her, doesn't really matter, but at that point you cannot do any intervention. When your vehicle is moving at 100 kilometers per hour, even if you manage to put a brake, it still has to cover a certain distance before it stops.
Right.
So when I talk of gratitude must become an attitude in both the partners. And it is responsibility, it is role of the therapist to ensure that this attitude is ingrained in both the partners.
Sure. Yeah, I as somebody who does practice gratitude every day, I do see the merits in it, and I know how wonderful it can be in changing the way you look at a person when you just start giving gratitude and accepting people for what they are. And yes, thank you for
Yeah.
reminding me that sometimes it can be just that simple, no matter how complicated the conflict.
Yeah, it is like if everything actually seeds out of gratitude, reality seeds out of gratitude if you actually look at it. So somebody was gratitude and they held that space with honor for another person to step into it, and society evolved. So yes, it begins with gratitude. So yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.